In a mansion where silence hides cruel secrets, an elderly woman is reduced to a servant in her own home. But she is not entirely alone. The housekeeper, loyal for decades, risks everything to protect her from the daughter-in-law's humiliations. When the son begins to suspect, the masks fall, and the truth erupts like an avalanche. In the end, it is this invisible alliance between two forgotten women that begins the family's redemption. The Ashworth mansion stood imposing in the heart of Kensington, one of London's most exclusive boroughs. Behind the high walls and meticulously manicured garden, the marble and glass residence not only symbolized power and wealth, but also held secrets that not even its owner, Richard Ashworth, fully knew. That autumn afternoon, the London sky threatened rain. Richard, a 38-year-old technology entrepreneur, stepped out of a taxi in front of his mansion's gate. He hadn't announced he was returning early from his business trip to Singapore. After nearly a month away, he had decided to surprise his fiancée, Beatrice Montgomery, and especially his mother, Mrs. Eleanor, who since her stroke had been confined to a wheelchair with limited mobility, unable to utter a single word. The driver placed the suitcases on the pavement and drove off. Richard took a deep breath, looking at the mansion that, despite its grandeur, felt so empty since his mother had fallen ill. He typed the code into the gate and entered silently, carrying only a briefcase. He would get the rest later. He just wanted to see his mother's face, to check on her. Instead of using the main entrance, Richard chose to enter through the back, passing through the conservatory his mother had loved so much before the accident. It was then that he heard raised voices coming from the living room. Instinctively, he slowed his pace and approached cautiously. "Do you think it's easy to deal with someone who says nothing? Who doesn't react to anything? Look at me when I'm talking." Beatrice's shrill voice echoed through the room. "Richard isn't here, so stop this pathetic act. We all know you could try harder." Richard froze in the hallway, just a few steps from the living room entrance. He felt his heart race, his breathing grow heavy. This couldn't be happening. "Please, Mrs. Montgomery, don't speak to Mrs. Eleanor like that." A calm, firm voice that Richard didn't recognize interrupted his fiancée's shouts. "You have no right to treat Mrs. Eleanor this way. And who are you to tell me what to do? A simple cleaner who can barely read. You've been here less than a month, and you already think you have the right to an opinion. Stick to cleaning and stay in your corner." Richard took another step and could finally see the scene. His mother in her wheelchair, huddled like a frightened child, while Beatrice, elegant in her Italian silk suit, pointed an accusing finger at her. Between them, with her back to him, stood a young woman in a simple uniform, who he assumed was the new cleaner Beatrice had mentioned. "Respect has nothing to do with education, Mrs. Montgomery," the woman replied, her tone even. "And I may be a cleaner, but I know you don't treat a sick person this way, especially not your fiancée's mother." It was at that moment that Richard saw his fiancée raise her hand, ready to slap the cleaner's face. His body reacted before his mind could fully process what was happening. "That's enough, Beatrice," his voice thundered through the room. The three women turned to him, their expressions completely different. His mother, with a sudden light in her dull eyes, Beatrice with a shock that quickly morphed into a fake smile, and the cleaner with a quiet dignity that impressed him. "Richard, my love, what a wonderful surprise." Beatrice ran towards him, trying to embrace him, but he sidestepped, walking directly to his mother. He knelt before the wheelchair and held Mrs. Eleanor's cold hands. "Mother, are you all right?" he asked, examining her pale face for any sign of discomfort or mistreatment. "Richard, don't be so dramatic," Beatrice tried to control the situation. "We were just having a little discussion about your mother's treatment. This new cleaner thinks she knows more than the doctors." Richard rose slowly, facing his fiancée with a coldness that made Beatrice take a step back. "I heard everything, Beatrice. Every word." His voice was low, controlled, but laden with a contained fury. "How could you speak to my mother like that?" The cleaner took a discreet step to the side, as if to give the couple privacy, but Richard stopped her with a gesture. "Stay, please. What is your name?" "Caroline Rivers, sir," she answered, her voice clear and unintimidated. despite the tense situation. Caroline had light brown skin, black hair tied in a simple bun, and large, expressive brown eyes. She wore no makeup, but there was something about her face, perhaps the combination of strength and gentleness, that conveyed a natural, authentic beauty. "How long have you been working here, Caroline?" "3 weeks, sir. I was hired by the domestic services agency when the other cleaner retired," Beatrice interrupted, impatient. "Richard, we can't discuss family matters in front of the staff. It's inappropriate. Let's go to the study." Ignoring his fiancée completely, Richard asked, "Caroline, what I just witnessed, has it happened before?" Caroline glanced briefly at Mrs. Eleanor, then at Beatrice, who was staring at her with blazing eyes, and finally at Richard. "Sir, I'm an honest person. I can't lie to you." She took a deep breath. "It's not the first time Mrs. Montgomery has lost her patience with your mother. It has happened other times when you were traveling." Beatrice let out a forced laugh. "This is ridiculous. She's obviously lying too. Gain your sympathy, Richard. Are you going to believe a cleaner you just met over the woman you're going to marry?" Richard looked at his mother, noticing something he hadn't seen in a long time, a single, silent tear rolling down Mrs. Eleanor's wrinkled cheek. It was enough to confirm the truth. "Beatrice, I want you to leave my house now," he said with surprising calm. "What? You can't be serious," Beatrice exclaimed, incredulous. "I have never been more serious in my life. Our engagement is over. I will send someone to collect your things tomorrow." Beatrice's face transformed into a mask of fury. "You'll regret this, Richard. No one ends things with me this way, no one." She grabbed her designer handbag and stormed out, the sound of her high heels echoing on the marble of the entrance hall until the door slammed violently. A heavy silence hung in the room. Richard ran a hand through his hair, visibly shaken, before kneeling again before his mother. "Forgive me, Mother. I didn't know. I should have realized," he murmured, holding Mrs. Eleanor's fragile hands. To his surprise, his mother squeezed his fingers lightly, a small gesture, but the first sign of a voluntary response in almost 2 years. Caroline remained standing, respectfully silent, until Richard turned to her. "Caroline, I would like to talk to you about something very important," he said, a new determination in his voice. "But first, I want to thank you for defending my mother when I wasn't here to do it." At that moment, none of the three could imagine how that afternoon would completely change the course of their lives. In the London sky, the rain finally began to fall, washing over the city and heralding the start of a new chapter for the residents of the Ashworth Mansion. If this story interested you, don't forget to subscribe to our channel and tell us which city you're watching from. Continuing on. A week after the incident, the Ashworth Mansion seemed to breathe a different air. Richard had made a decision that surprised everyone, especially Caroline. He invited her to work as Mrs. Eleanor's full-time companion, offering a considerably higher salary and a move into one of the guest rooms in the house. "I don't have a nursing degree, Mr. Ashworth," Caroline had argued, unsure. "I don't know if I'm the most suitable person to care for your mother." He had replied simply, "My mother responds to you in a way I haven't seen in years. That's worth more than any diploma." That Saturday morning, Caroline was carefully arranging her few belongings in the spacious wardrobe of the room she now occupied. She still felt out of place among the elegant furniture and silk curtains, so different from the small flat she shared with a roommate in Camden, North London. Born in a small town in Yorkshire, Caroline had moved to the capital 5 years earlier at 22, in search of better opportunities after her parents passed away. A light knock on the door interrupted her thoughts. "May I come in?" It was Richard, holding a tray with breakfast. "Of course, sir. The room is yours," she replied, still uncomfortable with the situation. "Caroline, please call me Richard, and this room is yours now." He placed the tray on a small table. "I thought you might like some breakfast before we start with my mother's routine." The gesture caught her by surprise. She wasn't used to being served, especially by her employer. "Thank you, Richard." She smiled shyly. "But you didn't have to bother. I was just coming down to help Mrs. Judith in the kitchen." Richard sat in a nearby armchair. He was wearing casual clothes, jeans and a simple shirt, that contrasted with the elegant suits he wore on workdays. Without the corporate look, he seemed younger and more approachable. "Caroline, before you officially start as my mother's companion, I need to share a few things about her." His tone was serious, but kind. "You deserve to know the full story." He told her that his mother, Eleanor Ashworth, had been a respected professor of English literature at King's College London, a vibrant woman passionate about art, music, and especially teaching. Everything changed 2 years ago when his father, Albert Ashworth, had a fatal accident on the road to the Sussex coast. "My mother was in the car. She survived physically, but something broke inside her that day." His voice wavered slightly. "The doctors say there are no neurological reasons for her silence. It's a psychological response to trauma. She just gave up on speaking." Caroline listened intently, feeling the pain in his words. "I hired the best specialists, but nothing worked. It was during that time I met Beatrice at a charity event. She seemed so understanding, so willing to help me with my mother. Now I see it was all just interest in my social and financial standing." "I'm so sorry," Caroline murmured. "What hurts most is thinking about my mother's suffering while I was away, trusting someone who treated her with cruelty." Richard ran a hand over his face in a gesture of frustration. "But yesterday, when I helped her to bed, she squeezed my hand again. Twice in 1 week, Caroline. That's never happened since the accident." Caroline smiled. "Your mother is in there, Richard. We just need to be patient and show her that she's safe now." After breakfast, Caroline accompanied Richard to Mrs. Eleanor's room. The room was spacious, with windows overlooking the garden, but it had a clinical feel due to the medical equipment placed discreetly in the corners. Mrs. Eleanor was sitting in her chair, already dressed by the nurse who came every morning to assist with her personal hygiene. Her grey hair was neatly combed, and she wore a soft-toned trouser and blouse set. Her eyes, however, seemed distant, fixed on some point in the garden outside. "Good morning, Mother." Richard approached and kissed her forehead. "I've brought Caroline to stay with you today. Do you remember her?" Caroline approached with a genuine smile. "Good morning, Mrs. Eleanor. It's a beautiful day out there. I thought you might like to get some sun in the garden after lunch." To Richard's surprise, his mother shifted her gaze from the window and looked at Caroline for a few seconds. "I'll leave you two now," he said, visibly moved by that small reaction. "I have some video calls, but I'll be in the study if you need anything." When Richard left, Caroline pulled up a chair and sat opposite Mrs. Eleanor. "You know, Mrs. Eleanor, I think we have something in common." She spoke naturally, as if talking to someone who could reply. "We both know the pain of loss. I lost my parents 5 years ago. An accident, too." Caroline began arranging some books on the shelf as she continued to speak. "For a long time I wanted to be silent, too. It felt like nothing was worth saying anymore. But then I realized that my words, even if only to myself, kept me connected to who they were, to who I am." Throughout the day, Caroline established a calm routine. She read passages from books to Mrs. Eleanor, described the flowers in the garden, and told simple stories of her childhood in Yorkshire. She didn't expect answers, only creating an atmosphere of serenity and connection. During lunch, Caroline noticed that Mrs. Eleanor barely touched her food when fed by others. "Shall we try something different?" Caroline suggested gently, placing the spoon in Mrs. Eleanor's hand and guiding it smoothly. "You can do it. Let's do it together." To the surprise of Judith, the cook who was watching the scene, Mrs. Eleanor allowed the joint movement and, after a few attempts, brought the spoon to her mouth with minimal help. "She hasn't done that in months," Judith commented, emotional. In the afternoon, as promised, Caroline took Mrs. Eleanor to the garden. She chose a spot partially shaded by an old oak tree. As she arranged a blanket over the lady's legs, she spoke about the surrounding plants. "This tree must have stories to tell, don't you think? How old do you suppose it is? Your son told me you used to love gardening before." Suddenly, Caroline noticed something surprising. A silent tear was rolling down Mrs. Eleanor's face, but unlike the tear of sadness from the day of the incident with Beatrice, her eyes seemed more alive, more present. "It's all right, Mrs. Eleanor." Caroline held her hand gently. Sometimes tears are necessary. They cleanse the soul. By the end of that first week as a companion, Caroline had already established a routine that brought small improvements to Mrs. Eleanor's condition. She responded more and more to stimuli, followed Caroline with her eyes around the house, and seemed more attentive when Richard was present. One Friday evening, when Richard returned early from work, he found Caroline in the conservatory, arranging some plants. The setting sun, filtered through the colored glass, bathed the room in a golden light, creating an almost magical aura around her. "How was the day?" he asked, approaching. Caroline turned, surprised by his presence. "It was good. Your mother ate better today, and we spent almost an hour in the garden. I think she smiled when a robin came near." Richard looked tired, but his eyes lit up at the news. "A smile? That would be extraordinary." "It was very subtle. Maybe I'm seeing things I want to see," Caroline admitted. "No, you have a gift. With her, you notice things no one else would." He hesitated for a moment. "Caroline, I received a call today from Beatrice's lawyer." Caroline's expression changed instantly. "What does she want?" "She's contesting the end of the engagement and making absurd financial demands." He sighed. "But that's not the worst part. She's hinting that I'll regret it if I don't meet her demands." "Do you think she could do something against your mother? Or you?" "I don't know. Beatrice has powerful connections in London, and she doesn't take defeat well." Richard seemed genuinely concerned. "I just wanted to warn you, so we can be alert to anything unusual." At that moment, an invisible bond began to form between them. The shared concern for Mrs. Eleanor's well-being created a complicity that went beyond the employer-employee relationship. "Don't worry," Caroline said firmly. "I'm here to protect your mother. I won't let anything bad happen to her." Richard looked at her with gratitude, and something more he couldn't define. "Thank you, Caroline. I don't know what we would have done without you." As they went back inside the house, neither of them noticed the black car parked discreetly across the street, from which a figure was carefully watching every movement in the Ashworth mansion. Dr. Renee Morgan's office, on the 15th floor of a commercial building on the Strand, exuded sophistication and discretion. Shades of grey and blue dominated the minimalist environment, creating an atmosphere of false serenity. Seated in her Italian leather armchair, the psychologist listened intently to Beatrice Montgomery, who gestured nervously as she recounted the latest events. "You should have seen the scene, Renee. That cleaner defending the old woman as if she were family." Beatrice adjusted the gold bracelet on her wrist. And Richard arriving at that exact moment, like in some cheap melodrama. 2 years planning every detail only for it to fall apart because of some little maid. Dr. Morgan maintained a neutral expression, but her calculating eyes betrayed her interest in the case. She had known Beatrice since their business school days, and knew that behind that magazine cover face was a relentless determination. "You said he promoted her to be his mother's companion?" she asked, adjusting her thin-framed glasses. "Yes, can you believe it? A woman with no training whatsoever caring for a patient with a complex neurological condition. It's absurd." Beatrice ran a hand through her impeccably straight hair. "And the worst part is, my lawyer says the financial demands might be difficult to get, since we didn't have a formal prenuptial agreement." Renee leaned forward slightly. "Perhaps we're approaching this from the wrong angle, Beatrice. If the problem is this Caroline person, we need to focus on her." "What do you mean?" "Think about it. A woman with no professional qualifications, caring for a vulnerable elderly person, gaining the trust of the rich single son. Doesn't that seem suspicious to you?" Beatrice's eyes lit up with understanding. "Are you suggesting she has ulterior motives?" "I'm suggesting that, as a psychologist specializing in trauma and family relationships, I would have serious ethical concerns about this situation." Renee opened a drawer and took out a business card. "I know this judge from the family division. She takes cases of potential exploitation of vulnerable elders very seriously." "And how would that help me?" "A psychological evaluation could determine if Mrs. Eleanor is being adequately cared for, or if she's under some kind of emotional manipulation." Renee smiled subtly. "As an expert, I could testify about the risks of this Unusual situation. Beatrice smiled, understanding the plan. And what if we found something compromising about this, Caroline? Some dark past, debts, anything? Exactly. For Mrs. Eleanor's sake, of course, Renee emphasized with irony. After all, we just want to protect a vulnerable old lady from potential opportunists, don't we? The two women exchanged a look of complicity, sealing an alliance that promised to bring a storm to the Ashworth mansion. The next morning at the mansion, Caroline was helping Mrs. Eleanor with her breakfast. In recent weeks, the elderly woman had shown small but significant progress. She could now hold her cup on her own and occasionally seemed to react to certain words or melodies. "You like this music, don't you?" Caroline commented, noticing how Mrs. Eleanor seemed more alert when an old folk song played on the radio. "Your son told me you were a great admirer of British music." Caroline had developed the habit of keeping a diary of Mrs. Eleanor's progress, noting every new reaction, preference, or change in behavior. This record, initially made just to help her establish an efficient routine, had become an important document of the elderly woman's evolution. Richard entered the dining room, already dressed for work, but stopped at the door to observe the scene. There was something in the way Caroline interacted with his mother, a unique combination of respect, affection, and dignity that moved him deeply. "Good morning," he finally announced his presence. "How are my two favorite women today?" Caroline blushed slightly at the casual expression of affection. "Your mother is having a good day. She slept better last night." "Great news." Richard approached and kissed his mother's forehead. "Mother, I'm thinking of taking you and Caroline to our beach house in Brighton for the weekend. What do you think? A change of scenery might do you good." To the surprise of both, Mrs. Eleanor slightly raised her eyes to her son, a gesture almost imperceptible to anyone not paying attention, but enormously significant to them. "I think she likes the idea," Caroline smiled. "It's settled then. We'll leave Friday afternoon." Richard checked his watch. "I have to go. I have an important meeting with Chinese investors." When he left, Caroline continued her routine with Mrs. Eleanor. The morning passed peacefully, with reading sessions in the garden and light physiotherapy exercises. After lunch, while Mrs. Eleanor rested, Caroline took the opportunity to organize some clothes in the elderly woman's room. The sound of the doorbell interrupted her task. Minutes later, Judith, the housekeeper, appeared at the door. "Caroline, there's a young woman here who wants to speak with you. She says she's a social worker from the council." Intrigued, Caroline went down to the living room, where a woman of about 40, formally dressed and carrying a folder, was waiting. "Good afternoon. I'm Marcia Smith, from the Social Services Department." The woman held out a card. "We're conducting a survey on home caregivers for the elderly in the area for a new council program." Something in the woman's overly formal tone made Caroline slightly uncomfortable, but she maintained a polite demeanor. "How can I help you?" "I'll need you to fill out some forms about your training and experience as a caregiver." The woman opened the folder. "Is Mr. Ashworth in?" "No. He's at work. He won't be back until this evening." "I see. And Mrs. Eleanor Ashworth? Could I see her?" Caroline hesitated. "She's resting now. She has a very specific routine that I prefer not to interrupt." The social worker smiled, but the gesture didn't reach her eyes. "Of course, I understand. Well, can we start with some basic questions? For example, what is your training in geriatric care?" For nearly an hour, the woman asked detailed questions about Caroline's routine, her previous experience, Mrs. Eleanor's condition, and even about her relationship with Richard. Some questions seemed strange for a social services survey, but Caroline answered truthfully, though with a certain caution. "Well, I think that's enough for today," the woman finally declared, putting away her notes. "May I come back on another occasion to meet Mrs. Eleanor and complete the assessment?" "I think it would be best to speak directly with Mr. Ashworth about that," Caroline replied, politely but firmly. After the visitor left, a sense of unease remained. Caroline immediately called Richard, reporting what had happened. "You did the right thing to let me know," he replied, concern evident in his voice. "I'll check with the council to see if this survey really exists. Don't open the door to anyone until I get back." When Richard returned late that afternoon, his expression confirmed Caroline's suspicions. "There is no official survey on home caregivers being conducted by the council," he informed her, slumping onto the living room sofa. "I called social services and confirmed it. The card she left has the correct logo, but the phone number is fake." "Who could have sent this woman and why?" Caroline questioned, disturbed. "I have a strong suspicion." Richard ran a hand over his face, a gesture of weariness. "Beatrice did not take the end of our relationship well, and she has connections everywhere." That night, while helping Mrs. Eleanor prepare for bed, Caroline noticed that the elderly woman seemed restless, as if she had sensed the tension in the air. "It's all right, Mrs. Eleanor," she murmured, fluffing the pillows. "No one is going to bother you. I'm here." To her surprise, Mrs. Eleanor held her hand with unexpected strength. Her eyes, normally vacant, seemed to be trying to communicate something important. "Are you trying to tell me something?" Caroline asked softly. Mrs. Eleanor just maintained a firm grip, as if afraid Caroline might disappear if she let go. The following week, small incidents began to occur. A delivery of the wrong medication that could have caused serious side effects for Mrs. Eleanor if Caroline hadn't checked carefully. A supposed surprise health inspection that Judith, suspicious, refused to allow without prior confirmation. And most disturbingly, Caroline realized she was being followed during her rare outings to buy personal items. "We need to be more careful," Richard commented during a late dinner after Caroline reported her concerns. "I'm going to hire additional security and install more cameras." "Do you really think Beatrice would go that far?" Caroline asked, still incredulous about the situation. "It's not just about the end of the relationship," Richard explained, pouring himself some water. "It's about money and wounded pride. My family controls one of the largest technology conglomerates in the country. The marriage to Beatrice would have been a strategic union for her family as, well..." Caroline absorbed the information in silence. Sometimes she forgot the scale of the Ashworths' fortune and influence, accustomed to the simplicity Richard showed in his daily life. "There's something else," Richard continued, hesitant. "I received a legal notice today. Beatrice is claiming concern for my mother's well-being and is requesting an evaluation to assess whether she's receiving adequate care." "What?" Caroline paled. "But that's absurd. Your mother is getting better every day." "I know, but Beatrice has hired a renowned psychologist, Dr. Renee Morgan, who is questioning the appropriateness of having a caregiver without specialized training." He held Caroline's hand across the table. "Don't worry, my lawyers will handle this." But the worry had already set in. That night, Caroline had trouble sleeping, imagining the possible outcomes of the situation. How could she prove that her care, based more on empathy and dedication than on diplomas, was exactly what Mrs. Eleanor needed? The next morning, while Caroline was helping Mrs. Eleanor with her sunbath in the garden, she noticed a suspicious movement near the side wall. Instinctively, she positioned the wheelchair to shield the elderly woman with her own body. "Who's there?" she called out loudly. No one answered, but Caroline was sure she had seen someone. Quickly, she took Mrs. Eleanor back inside the house and activated the security system. In the afternoon, she received a call that made her blood run cold. "Caroline Rivers?" A female voice, professional and cold, sounded from the other end of the line. "Yes, who is this?" "Dr. Renee Morgan, psychologist appointed by the court to evaluate the case of Eleanor Ashworth. I would like to schedule a visit for tomorrow at 10 a.m. Caroline felt her heart race. "I'll need to confirm with Mr. Ashworth first." "It's not a request, Ms. Rivers, it's a court order." The voice took on a slightly threatening tone. "I will be there tomorrow with or without Mr. Ashworth's approval, and I strongly suggest that Mrs. Eleanor be available for evaluation." When the call ended, Caroline realized her hands were shaking. A shadow of doubt hung over her. Was she really qualified to face what was to come? Or would her presence end up harming Mrs. Eleanor and Richard? As these questions tormented her mind, Caroline didn't notice she was being watched by Mrs. Eleanor. The elderly woman, sitting silently in her chair, had a different expression. In her eyes, a mixture of concern and determination she hadn't shown in a long time. The Ashworth mansion awoke to a palpable tension. At 9:45 a.m., Caroline nervously tidied the living room, checking that everything was in order for Dr. Renee Morgan's visit. She had carefully chosen Mrs. Eleanor's outfit, an elegant set in shades of blue, her favorite color, and prepared the room with family photographs and the books the elderly woman used to enjoy before the accident. Richard, who had cancelled all his morning meetings to be present, paced back and forth, checking his watch every few minutes. "Relax, Richard," Caroline tried to reassure him, despite her own nervousness. "Your mother is having a good day today. She responded well to breakfast and even made prolonged eye contact with me during our reading." He paused for a moment, admiring the calm Caroline was striving to convey. "How do you manage to stay so serene? This evaluation could define my mother's future, your future here." Caroline adjusted a cushion on the sofa before replying, "I learned early on that excessive worry doesn't solve problems, it only creates new ones." She smiled faintly. "Besides, we're not doing anything wrong. Your mother is receiving the best care possible." The sound of the doorbell interrupted their conversation. Judith announced the arrival of Dr. Morgan and an assistant, who was carrying audio-visual recording equipment. Renee Morgan entered the room with the confidence of someone accustomed to luxurious surroundings. Tall, elegantly dressed, with brown hair severely pinned in an austere bun, she carried a leather briefcase that completed her appearance of unquestionable authority. "Mr. Ashworth, good morning." Her voice was soft, but with a calculatedly professional tone. "I appreciate your cooperation with this evaluation," Richard greeted her formally. "Doctor, I would like to express that I consider this procedure unnecessary and motivated by questionable interests." Renee smiled with false understanding. "I understand your frustration, but the well-being of vulnerable people is above personal preferences. I am merely a professional doing my duty." Her eyes then fell on Caroline, who remained near Mrs. Eleanor. "You must be the caregiver," she said, emphasizing the last word in a way that sounded almost derogatory. "Caroline Rivers," she replied simply, extending a hand that Renee did not take, pretending to be busy with her documents. "Well, let's begin. I need some time alone with Mrs. Eleanor, then with the caregiver. And finally with you, Mr. Ashworth." Renee instructed her assistant to position the camera. "Please wait in the next room." Richard seemed ready to protest, but Caroline lightly touched his arm, signaling for them to accept the procedure. Before leaving, she leaned in and whispered to Mrs. Eleanor, "I'll be right there, don't worry." In the adjacent library, Richard couldn't stand still. "I don't like this. That woman has connections to Beatrice, I'm sure of it." "Even if she does, what can she do? Your mother is well cared for, she's improving, and there are medical records to prove it." Caroline tried to sound confident, despite her own doubts. After 20 minutes, which felt like hours, Renee called for Caroline. In the living room, Mrs. Eleanor seemed more tense than usual. "Now I need to speak with Ms. Rivers. The evaluation will be recorded as per the court order," Renee explained, indicating the chair opposite hers. For the next hour, Caroline was subjected to a meticulous interrogation about her training, experience, care methods, and relationship with the Ashworth family. The questions, seemingly neutral on the surface, contained subtle traps. "So, without any specialized training, you decided you knew what was best for a patient with complex neurological trauma?" Renee questioned at one point. "No, doctor. I never presumed to know more than the specialists." Caroline kept her voice calm. "I follow the medical guidelines strictly. What I offer is humane care, attention and respect for Mrs. Eleanor's dignity." "And what about your relationship with Mr. Ashworth? Don't you consider it a conflict of interest to develop feelings for your employer while caring for his vulnerable mother?" The question, designed to destabilize her, made Caroline blush, but she maintained her composure. "My relationship with Mr. Ashworth is strictly professional. My focus is on Mrs. Eleanor's well-being." When the interview with Caroline ended, she noticed Renee's satisfied smile, as if she had gotten exactly what she wanted. Later, after Renee finally left after interviewing Richard, a heavy silence hung over the house. Caroline found Mrs. Eleanor in her room, visibly upset. "What did she say to you?" Caroline asked softly, arranging the blanket over the elderly woman's legs. She didn't expect an answer. She just wanted Mrs. Eleanor to know she wasn't alone. To her surprise, the elderly woman moved her fingers slightly, as if trying to write something in the air. "Do you want to write? I can bring a pen and paper." When Caroline returned with the materials, she placed the pen between Mrs. Eleanor's trembling fingers and held the paper. With slow, imprecise movements, the elderly woman traced what appeared to be the word lies. Lies? Did the doctor lie about something? Caroline asked, moved by this attempt at communication. Mrs. Eleanor made an almost imperceptible movement with her head that could be interpreted as affirmative. Richard, who was watching from the doorway, approached with teary eyes. "Mother, are you trying to tell us something important?" At that moment, the phone rang. It was Richard's lawyer, Mr. Paul Matthews, with disturbing news. "I've just received the preliminary report from the psychological evaluation," he informed him. "It's quite negative, Richard. Dr. Morgan is recommending an urgent hearing to re-evaluate your mother's care, suggesting she should be transferred to a specialized clinic." "That's absurd," Richard exclaimed. "My mother is improving here. Any change now would be traumatic." "There's more," the lawyer continued. "She makes insinuations about the relationship between you and Ms. Rivers, suggesting the environment is emotionally contaminated and that this is detrimental to your mother's recovery." Caroline, who was listening to the conversation on speakerphone, felt her stomach sink. It was exactly what she feared. Her presence was being used against Mrs. Eleanor. "What can we do?" Richard asked, trying to stay calm. "I'm going to request a counter-evaluation with another specialist of our choosing. In the meantime, document everything: progress, routine, medications. We'll need concrete evidence to contest this report." After hanging up, Richard found Caroline in the hallway, with unshed tears in her eyes. "Maybe I should leave," she murmured. "I'm bringing more trouble than help to you." "Don't even think about it," Richard replied firmly. "My mother has never been better since you arrived. I won't let Beatrice and her allies manipulate us like this." That night, Caroline barely slept. She tossed and turned, thinking about how Mrs. Eleanor had tried to communicate something important. She decided they needed to find a way to give the elderly woman a voice. Perhaps that was the key to resolving the whole situation. The next morning, Caroline appeared at breakfast with an idea. "What if we tried an alternative communication system with your mother? Something simple, like cards with yes and no or basic images she can point to?" Richard considered the proposal, excited by the possibility. "We can try. Any form of communication would be a huge breakthrough." Over the next few days, while they anxiously awaited news from the lawyer, Caroline dedicated herself to developing methods to facilitate communication with Mrs. Eleanor. They started with colored cards, red for no, green for yes, and gradually introduced more options. The progress was slow but consistent. Mrs. Eleanor began to respond more frequently, using the cards to express simple preferences. If she wanted to read in the garden, if she was cold or hot, if she liked a particular song. On a particularly productive afternoon, while they were practicing with the cards, the phone rang again. It was Mr. Matthews, and his tone was not encouraging. "Richard, we have a problem. Judge Francis Barron has accepted the request for an emergency hearing. It's scheduled for next week." "So soon?" Richard felt his blood run cold. "We haven't had enough time to prepare our defense." "It's a procedural tactic. Beatrice has hired the firm Moss & Associates. They're known for being aggressive and having strong influence in the court." "What about the counter-evaluation we requested?" The judge denied it, claiming there isn't enough time before the hearing. "Richard, we need to prepare for the worst. They are moving all the pieces to get your mother transferred to a clinic controlled by Beatrice's allies." The news fell like a bombshell on the house. Caroline, who was with Mrs. Eleanor in the next room, sensed the change in atmosphere as soon as Richard hung up. "Bad news?" she asked, though she already knew the answer. "The hearing is next week, and they've denied our request for a counter-evaluation." Richard looked devastated. "Caroline, I'm afraid of what might happen. If my mother is transferred to a clinic under Beatrice's influence—" He didn't complete the sentence, but Caroline understood the gravity. This wasn't just a dispute over wounded pride. It was about control of the Ashworth fortune, about power, and most importantly, about the well-being of a vulnerable elderly woman who was finally showing signs of recovery. "We need to find your mother's old caregiver," Caroline suggested suddenly, "the one who was here before me, who must have witnessed how Beatrice treated Mrs. Eleanor." "Mrs. Joan," She resigned a few months after I started dating Beatrice. Richard frowned, as if a new understanding was dawning on him. Now that I think about it, it was a strange decision. She had cared for my mother for years since before the accident. Can you get in touch with her? I'll try. We had a good relationship. While Richard left to make some calls, Caroline turned her attention back to Mrs. Eleanor, who seemed restless. You understand what's happening, don't you? Caroline asked softly. To her surprise, Mrs. Eleanor picked up the green card. Yes. Is there something you want to tell us? Something that might help? Again, the green card. Caroline's heart raced. Is it about Beatrice? About how she treated you when Richard wasn't? Here? Once more, the green card. Mrs. Eleanor, if you know something important, we need to find a way for you to communicate it. For your sake, for your son's, and for everything we've built together these past months. The elderly woman stared intently at Caroline for a few seconds, and then, with visible effort, she raised a trembling hand and pointed to the drawer of her bedside table. Caroline, confused, approached and opened the drawer. Inside, she found a small notebook, visibly old and well-used. Is this yours? Do you want me to look at this? Mrs. Eleanor nodded, slightly. Opening the notebook, Caroline discovered it was a diary written in Mrs. Eleanor's elegant handwriting. The last entries dated from just before the accident that had silenced her voice. But what caught Caroline's attention were some notes made after the accident. Trembling, almost illegible words, written in moments of lucidity or extraordinary determination. Richard, Caroline called, her voice betraying the emotion of her discovery. Come see this immediately. When Richard entered the room, he found Caroline with tears in her eyes, holding his mother's diary. Your mother has been communicating all this time, she explained, showing him the pages. Not with spoken words, but by writing when she could, and she documented everything, how Beatrice treated her, the threats, the humiliations. Richard looked at his mother, who held an expression more alert than he had ever seen since the accident. Mother, why did you never show me this? Mrs. Eleanor pointed to one of the pages, where she had written in a shaky hand, She threatened to have me committed if I tried to tell you. This changes everything, Richard murmured, hugging his mother carefully. With this, and if we can find Mrs. Joan, we have a real chance at the hearing. Caroline watched the scene, feeling a mixture of hope and apprehension. The battle would be difficult, but now they had a powerful weapon, the silent yet determined voice of Mrs. Eleanor herself. We'll fight this together, she promised, holding the elderly woman's hand, who returned the grip with surprising strength. With 5 days until the hearing, they had a lot of work to do. The race against time had begun, and everyone's future depended on what would happen in court. The Royal Courts of Justice in central London stood majestic and intimidating on the morning of the hearing. Caroline watched the movement of lawyers and staff through the main hall, feeling out of place in the formal environment. She wore her best outfit, a navy blue pencil skirt and a white blouse, bought especially for the occasion, but still felt inadequate among the expensive suits and genuine leather briefcases. Stay calm, Richard murmured beside her, sensing her nervousness. Mr. Matthews is one of the best lawyers in the country. Caroline nodded, though she couldn't shake the anxiety. This hearing would decide not only her professional future, but more importantly, the fate of Mrs. Eleanor, who had stayed at home under the care of nurses hired especially for the day. Richard's lawyer, Mr. Paul Matthews, approached with determined steps. A man in his 50s, with graying hair and an impeccable posture, he exuded a confidence that slightly calmed Caroline's nerves. We have a situation, he announced without preamble. I've just confirmed that Judge Frances Barron is the godmother to Beatrice's sister's child. What? Richard paled. Isn't that a clear conflict of interest? It is, but we discovered it too late to request a change of judge, Mr. Matthews explained. We'll have to play the hand we're dealt. At that moment, their attention was drawn to the entrance of the courthouse. Beatrice arrived, stunning in a light beige Italian suit, accompanied by Dr. Renee Morgan and a tall, intimidating lawyer who Caroline assumed was from the famous firm Moss & Associates. Beatrice cast a look of superiority towards Caroline, whispering something to Renee that made the psychologist smirk maliciously. That small gesture clearly revealed what was at stake. It wasn't about Mrs. Eleanor's well-being, but about revenge and power. "Don't let them intimidate you," Richard whispered, discreetly holding Caroline's hand. "We're on the right side." When they entered the courtroom, Caroline felt the weight of judicial formality. Judge Frances Barron was already seated, a woman with a severe expression and a piercing gaze. Beside her, a clerk prepared to record every word spoken. Case number 2025 and 67345-8. Claimant, Beatrice Montgomery. Defendant, Richard Ashworth. Matter: protective order in favor of Eleanor Ashworth, announced the court officer. The first to speak was Dr. Morgan, who presented her report with studied eloquence, describing the environment in the Ashworth home as emotionally harmful to Mrs. Eleanor's recovery. "Your Honor, I found a patient who was clearly stressed under the care of a person with no professional qualifications in an unstable domestic environment due to the inappropriate relationship between the patient's son and the supposed caregiver," she declared with feigned concern. Caroline felt her face burn. The insinuation about her relationship with Richard was completely unfounded and manipulative. Beatrice's lawyer, Mr. Richard Moss, rose next. Tall, elegant, and with a commanding presence, he addressed the judge with the familiarity of one who frequents those halls daily. "Your Honor, my client, Ms. Beatrice Montgomery, was in a 2-year relationship with Mr. Ashworth and developed a significant emotional bond with Mrs. Eleanor. Her sole interest in this proceeding is to ensure the well-being of the lady, who is clearly not receiving adequate care." He then called Beatrice to the stand. With tears that seemed rehearsed, she described her deep concern for Mrs. Eleanor's state. "I consider her a second mother," Beatrice declared, her voice choked with emotion. "To see her decline under the care of an unqualified person breaks my heart. Richard is clearly letting his personal feelings for the employee interfere with his judgment about what's best for his mother." When it was Mr. Matthews' turn to present the defense, he began calmly and methodically, highlighting the documented progress in Mrs. Eleanor's condition since Caroline's arrival. "Your Honor, we have here the reports from neurologist Dr. Edward Ford, which attest to a significant improvement in the patient's reflexes and cognitive responses over the last 3 months. He presented the documents. Furthermore, the physiotherapist records progress in the mobility of her upper limbs that had not been observed in the previous 2 years. The judge examined the documents with a neutral, unreadable expression. "I would now like to call Ms. Caroline Rivers to clarify her role in Mrs. Eleanor's care," Mr. Matthews continued. With her heart racing, Caroline made her way to the witness stand. After taking the oath, she faced the inquisitive gaze of Judge Barron. "Ms. Rivers, what exactly is your training for caring for a patient with Mrs. Eleanor's complex condition?" The first question already revealed the judge's predisposition. "Your Honor, I do not have formal training in nursing or geriatrics," Caroline answered honestly. "But I have personal experience with family care, and more importantly, I have developed effective communication with Mrs. Eleanor, who has responded positively." "So you admit to having no technical qualifications for the role you perform?" the judge pressed. "I admit to not having a diploma, Your Honor, but I strictly follow the guidelines of the specialists who see Mrs. Eleanor weekly, and we document every bit of progress in a detailed diary." When it was Beatrice's lawyer's turn to question Caroline, he adopted an even more aggressive stance. "Ms. Rivers, is it true that you were a cleaner before conveniently taking on the role of primary caregiver for a lady whose son commands a financial empire?" Mr. Moss asked with ill-disguised contempt. "Yes, I worked as a cleaner," Caroline replied, maintaining her dignity. "And I was invited to care for Mrs. Eleanor because I showed empathy and respect for her, qualities that are independent of job title or academic training. And what about your relationship with Mr. Ashworth? Don't you consider that your personal involvement with him represents a conflict of interest in the care of his mother?" Caroline felt her face burn again. "There is no personal involvement beyond a professional relationship and mutual respect, sir." "Really? Then why were you seen dining alone with him on several occasions, or walking hand in hand in the mansion's garden?" The lawyer presented photographs taken from a distance, clearly by someone who had been monitoring them. The room filled with murmurs. Caroline felt exposed and vulnerable. The photos, though showing innocent moments, were being presented in a way that suggested an inappropriate intimacy. When Richard testified, he faced equally aggressive questioning, but remained firm in his position. "My mother is better under Caroline's care than she has been in the last 2 years. That is a fact documented by respected professionals." The hearing seemed to be heading for an unfavorable outcome. Judge Barron made notes with a stern expression, occasionally exchanging glances with Beatrice that suggested a decision had already been made. It was then that Mr. Matthews made an unexpected move. "Your Honor, we would like to present an additional witness who was not on the initial list because we were only able to locate her yesterday." The judge frowned, clearly annoyed. "This is highly irregular, Mr. Matthews." "I understand, Your Honor, but this witness has crucial information about the treatment Mrs. Eleanor received before Ms. Rivers' arrival." After a few moments of deliberation, the judge reluctantly agreed. "Very well, but be brief." The side door opened, and a lady of about 65 entered, walking with determined steps despite her age. Caroline recognized her immediately from photographs she had seen in the house. It was Mrs. Joan Oliver, Mrs. Eleanor's former caregiver. After taking the oath, Mrs. Joan faced the courtroom with the dignity of someone not easily intimidated. "Mrs. Oliver, why did you leave your job at the Ashworth home after so many years of service?" asked Mr. Matthews. Mrs. Joan adjusted her glasses before answering, "Because I could no longer bear to see how Miss Beatrice treated Mrs. Eleanor when Mr. Richard was not at home." A murmur went through the room. Beatrice sat up straight, visibly tense. "Could you elaborate?" requested Mr. Matthews. "She treated Mrs. Eleanor like a burden, an obstacle. She said horrible things, said the lady was faking it, that she was a manipulator." Mrs. Jones spoke with a firm, unwavering voice. "When I tried to alert Mr. Richard, I was threatened with a lawsuit for defamation. At my age, I couldn't risk a legal battle against powerful people." "Do you have any proof of these allegations?" asked the judge, now more attentive. "Yes, Your Honor," Mrs. Joan replied, surprising everyone. She took a small device from her purse. "I started recording some interactions after the threats against me and—" Mrs. Eleanor intensified. "I knew no one would believe my word against Ms. Montgomery's." Mr. Matthews approached to receive the device. "With the court's permission, we would like to play some of these recordings." After obtaining authorization, he connected the device to a sound system. Beatrice's voice filled the room, sharp and cruel. "Do you think I care about your pathetic silence, you manipulative old woman? If you told Richard what happens here, who do you think he'd believe? You, a vegetable who can barely hold a spoon, or me, the woman who will carry on the Ashworth empire?" Other, equally disturbing recordings followed. Threats, insults, moments when Beatrice clearly neglected Mrs. Eleanor's basic needs. The room remained in shocked silence as the evidence mounted. Beatrice's face twisted into a mask of fury. "This is illegal! These recordings were made without my consent." The judge, visibly shaken by the content of the recordings, raised her hand to silence her. "Ms. Montgomery, I suggest you restrain yourself. These recordings, though obtained in a questionable manner, are extremely relevant to this case." Mr. Matthews then presented his final piece of evidence, Mrs. Eleanor's diary with its shaky notes made after the accident. "Your Honor, Mrs. Eleanor herself found the strength to document the abuse she suffered. These are her own words, written with immense difficulty in her moments of lucidity." The judge examined the diary carefully, her expression gradually changing from skepticism to dismay. "Mr. Moss, does your client have anything to say about this evidence?" she finally asked. Beatrice's lawyer for the first time seemed destabilized. "Your Honor, these allegations are clearly exaggerated and taken out of context. My client may have had moments of frustration, like anyone caring for someone with special needs, but—" He was interrupted by the judge. "Mr. Moss, what I heard on these recordings goes far beyond moments of frustration. These are explicit threats and mistreatment of a vulnerable person." Caroline watched the scene with a racing heart. The tide had turned completely. Beatrice was whispering furiously with her lawyer, while Renee Morgan seemed to be trying to physically distance herself from the situation, as if to deny any association with what had just been revealed. After a brief recess for deliberation, the judge returned with a grave expression. "This case has revealed a deeply disturbing situation," she began. "I came to this hearing with an impression formed from Dr. Morgan's report, but the evidence presented today demonstrates a very different reality." She looked directly at Caroline, this time without her previous hostility. "Ms. Rivers, although you do not possess formal training for the position you hold, it is evident that your care has been beneficial to Mrs. Eleanor Ashworth, as attested by the medical reports presented." Turning to Beatrice, her tone hardened. "As for the claimant, I am ordering an immediate investigation into the mistreatment documented in the recordings and the patient's diary. Ms. Montgomery, you are forbidden from approaching Mrs. Eleanor Ashworth or any member of her family pending the conclusion of this investigation." With a final strike of her gavel, the judge declared, "The request to transfer Mrs. Eleanor to an institution is denied. The patient will remain under her current care, with Ms. Rivers as the primary caregiver, conditional on the continuation of the specialized medical monitoring already established." The room erupted in murmurs. Beatrice stood up abruptly, her face contorted in a mask of fury, and stormed out, followed by her lawyer. Dr. Morgan, trying to salvage her professional reputation, approached the judge for a private conversation that was clearly not going well, judging by the magistrate's increasingly severe expression. Caroline felt her legs tremble as she finally stood up. Richard approached, his eyes shining with emotion. "It's over," he murmured. "You did it." She shook her head. "No, Richard, we did it. All of us, you, me, Mrs. Joan, and especially your mother, who found the strength to communicate when we needed her most." As they were leaving the courthouse, Mrs. Joan approached Caroline. "You're a good girl," the lady said, squeezing her hand. "Mrs. Eleanor was lucky you came into her life." "Thank you for coming," Caroline replied emotionally. "Without your testimony." "I owed it to Mrs. Eleanor," Joan interrupted softly, "and to myself. Staying silent out of fear never brought peace to anyone." In the car on the way home, Caroline finally allowed herself to relax. The battle had been won, but something told her the war wasn't completely over. Beatrice didn't seem like the type of person to accept defeat easily. "What are you thinking about?" Richard asked, noticing her pensive expression. "About your mother. I can't wait to tell her she can rest easy now." Richard smiled, placing his hand over hers. "And you too, Caroline. You can rest easy too." When they arrived at the mansion, they were greeted by Judith, who ran to them with an expression of astonishment and joy. "Thank God you're here. Something incredible happened. Mrs. Eleanor, she—" "What happened?" Richard asked, alarmed. "Is she all right?" "Yes, better than ever. She spoke, Mr. Richard. She said Caroline's name. It was just one word, but she spoke." Caroline and Richard exchanged looks of disbelief before running inside the house, where a new phase of their journey was about to begin. 6 months had passed since the hearing that changed the course of their lives. The Ashworth mansion, once a place of tension and painful silences, now pulsed with a renewed energy. The windows were left open longer, letting in the golden London sunlight, as if the house itself were breathing a sigh of relief. On a sunny Saturday morning, Caroline was guiding Mrs. Eleanor through the spacious garden, no longer in a wheelchair, but walking slowly with the aid of a special cane. The doctors called her recovery remarkable and unprecedented, technical words that barely captured the miracle they all witnessed daily. "You're doing very well today," Caroline commented, gently supporting Mrs. Eleanor's arm as they rounded the small ornamental pond. "Do you think we can make it to that old oak tree?" "We can," Mrs. Eleanor replied, pronouncing each syllable with effort, but also with undeniable determination. The first word Mrs. Eleanor had spoken after 2 years of silence had been Caroline's name that afternoon after the hearing. Since then, word by word, phrase by phrase, her voice had been returning, initially a hoarse whisper, now increasingly clear, though still hesitant. The speech therapist who came to the mansion 3 times a week said she had never seen such an impressive recovery in someone who had been silent for so long. "It's as if something unlocked inside her," the professional had explained, like a dam that finally found a small channel for the water to flow through again. As they walked, Caroline noticed the occasional glances Mrs. Eleanor cast towards the large house. She knew what the lady was looking for, or rather, who. "Richard should be back from the office soon," she commented softly. "He called and said he has a surprise for you." A smile lit up Mrs. Eleanor's face. "My son, full of surprises." Caroline smiled back, sharing the moment of complicity. In recent months, her relationship with Mrs. Eleanor had evolved from caregiver and patient to something much deeper, a true friendship, an almost familial bond. The consequences of the hearing had extended far beyond the legal victory. Beatrice was now facing criminal charges for the abuse of a vulnerable person based on the recordings presented. Dr. Renee Morgan's professional license was under investigation by the Psychology Board, accused of unethical conduct and fabricating reports. The prestigious firm Moss & Associates had publicly distanced itself from the case, fearful of the damage to its reputation. But none of that really mattered within the walls of the Ashworth mansion. What truly mattered was the rebirth of Mrs. Eleanor, who day by day was reclaiming not just her voice, but her essence. "I want to sit a little," Mrs. Eleanor requested when they reached the oak tree. Caroline helped her settle onto the wooden bench, strategically placed under the tree's generous shade. As she arranged the blanket over the lady's knees, more out of habit than necessity on that warm morning, she noticed how Mrs. Eleanor was watching her movements intently. "What is it?" Caroline asked gently. "Is something bothering you?" Mrs. Eleanor shook her head. "Are you happy here?" The question took Caroline by surprise. "Of course I am. Why do you ask?" "You are young," Mrs. Eleanor articulated carefully. "Have your own life." Caroline sat beside her on the bench, understanding the genuine concern behind those fragmented words. "Mrs. Eleanor, caring for you has brought me more happiness and purpose than any other job I've ever had. I'm exactly where I want to be." It was true. In recent months, Caroline had received other job offers, some from wealthy families impressed by the miracle she had supposedly performed with Mrs. Eleanor. But the thought of leaving this house, this lady she had grown to love like family, was simply unthinkable. "And Richard?" Mrs. Eleanor asked, with a special twinkle in her eye that Caroline knew well. This question was even harder to answer. The relationship between Caroline and Richard had transformed in recent months, evolving from mutual gratitude and respect to something deeper, more complex. There were moments, a lingering gaze, a casual touch of hands that sent an electric current, conversations that stretched late into the night, that suggested feelings beyond friendship. But neither of them had given voice to these feelings, as if they were afraid to break the delicate balance they had built. "Your son is a wonderful man, Mrs. Eleanor. I have great admiration for him," Caroline replied diplomatically. The elderly lady smiled, a smile that clearly said she wasn't fooled by evasive answers. "You too stubborn." Caroline couldn't help but laugh. "You're getting more perceptive every day." "Always was." Mrs. Eleanor pointed to her own temple with a trembling finger. "Up here, all working." It was true. As her communication improved, it became evident that Mrs. Eleanor's mind had remained perfectly lucid throughout her time of silence. She had observed, understood, and registered everything around her. A prisoner in a body that wouldn't respond, but with a spirit that had never completely broken. The sound of an approaching car interrupted their conversation. Moments later, Richard appeared in the garden, accompanied by a young woman Caroline didn't know. "Mother, Caroline, I have great news," Richard announced, approaching with a radiant smile. "This is Dr. Lucy Preston, a neuroscientist from King's College. She's developed a new neurological rehabilitation protocol that could really help you, Mother." The doctor, a woman of about 35 with a kind expression and confident posture, greeted them warmly. "Mrs. Eleanor, I've been following your case through the reports your son shared with me. Your recovery is already extraordinary, but I believe we can make even more progress with some innovative techniques. As the doctor explained the details of the treatment, Caroline watched the interaction with a mixture of hope and a pang of something she took a moment to recognize as insecurity. Would this renowned specialist, with her advanced scientific methods, be the one to finally complete the recovery that Caroline had started with her intuitive and loving care? As if reading her thoughts, Richard discreetly approached while his mother talked with the doctor. "Dr. Preston's work will be a complement to yours, never a replacement," he murmured. "No one could replace what you've done for my mother, Caroline. For us." The intensity in his eyes made Caroline look away, her heart racing. There were more and more of these moments between them, words laden with unspoken meanings, glances that communicated what their voices dared not express. In the afternoon, after Dr. Preston left, promising to return on Monday to start the new treatment, Richard suggested a walk in Hyde Park. "I thought it would be good to get out for a bit, enjoy this beautiful day," he explained. "I've already spoken with Judith. She'll stay with Mother." Caroline hesitated. "Are you sure your mother will be all right?" "Absolutely. In fact, it was her idea. She said we need fresh air to clear our foggy minds, whatever that means." He laughed, but there was a note of nervousness in his voice that intrigued Caroline. Hyde Park was particularly beautiful that autumn afternoon. The trees displayed leaves in shades of gold and red, and a gentle breeze tempered London's typical warmth. They walked side by side, watching families having picnics, couples in love, children chasing colourful kites. "It feels like another world, doesn't it?" Richard commented as they walked around the Serpentine. "Here, nobody cares if you're rich or poor, famous or anonymous." Caroline nodded. "I've always liked places like this where all that matters is just being human. That's what you taught me, you know." He stopped walking, turning to face her, "To value what really matters. Before you came along, I was so lost in obligations, in business, in the superficiality of the world that Beatrice represented." Caroline felt her face grow warm under his intense gaze. "I didn't do anything special, Richard. I just acted as any decent person would." "No, Caroline." He gently took her hands. "What you did was extraordinary. You didn't just save my mother. You saved me too. You opened my eyes to what truly has value in life." Caroline's heart was beating so fast she feared he could hear it. They were standing under a leafy tree, partially shielded from the other park-goers. The moment seemed suspended in time, charged with possibilities. "Caroline, I need to say something I've been holding back for months," Richard continued, his voice deeper, more intense. To know our relationship started in an unusual way, that the circumstances weren't ideal for what I'm feeling, but I can't pretend anymore that you're just my mother's caregiver." He took a step forward, closing the distance between them. "I've fallen in love with you, with your strength, your kindness, your integrity, with the way you bring out the best in people around you, with how you turned our house back into a home." Caroline felt tears welling in her eyes, words she had longed to hear for so long, but which had always seemed impossible, forbidden. "Richard, we come from such different worlds," she murmured, voicing the fear that had always haunted her. "You're Richard Ashworth, heir to an empire. I'm just Caroline Rivers, a simple woman from a small town in Yorkshire." "No, you were never just Caroline," he replied with conviction. "And as for different worlds, maybe that's exactly what I needed. Someone to show me there's life beyond boardrooms and empty social events." He moved even closer, gently touching her face. "I love you, Caroline. And if you feel the same, I want to build a life with you, not as boss and employee, not as people from different worlds, but as equal partners." The tears now flowed freely down Caroline's face. For months she had suppressed her feelings, convincing herself that what Richard felt for her was merely gratitude, that a relationship between them would be impossible, inappropriate. "I love you too," she finally confessed, her voice almost a whisper. "But I'm scared, Richard. Scared of what people will say. Scared I don't belong in your world. Scared that one day you'll realize you've made a mistake. "The only mistake would be letting fear stop what we can build together," he replied, before leaning in and kissing her softly. The kiss, so long awaited by both, seemed to seal a silent promise of understanding, of respect, of a love that transcended social differences and others' expectations. When they returned to the mansion hours later, fingers intertwined and smiles they couldn't contain, they were greeted by Mrs. Eleanor, who was waiting for them on the veranda with a knowing look. "Finally," she said simply, with the most radiant smile they had seen on her face since the accident. The following months brought profound changes for everyone. Mrs. Eleanor progressed rapidly with the new treatment, combining Dr. Preston's scientific techniques with Caroline's loving care. She could now hold simple conversations, though still with some difficulty, and walked around the house with increasing independence. Richard and Caroline built their relationship with the same dedication and patience they had devoted to Mrs. Eleanor's recovery. It wasn't always easy. Occasionally there were disapproving glances at social events, malicious comments from people who insinuated Caroline was a gold digger. But they faced everything together, strengthened by the knowledge that what they felt for each other was true and valuable. On a special evening, exactly 1 year after the fateful day Richard had returned, unexpectedly and caught Beatrice mistreating his mother, they hosted a small dinner at the mansion. Only the closest were present: Mrs. Eleanor, Judith, Mrs. Joan, who now visited regularly, Mr. Matthews and his wife, and Dr. Preston. After dinner, Richard asked for everyone's attention. Standing beside Caroline, he looked nervous but determined. "A year ago, our family was broken," he began. "My mother, a prisoner of silence. Me, blind to what truly mattered. Our house, a place of shadows and secrets." He looked at Caroline with so much love that she felt her heart overflow with emotion. Then, by some miracle, a fate, Caroline entered our lives, not just as an employee, but as an angel who showed us the way back to the light, to truth, to love. Richard then knelt before her, pulling a small velvet box from his pocket. "Caroline Rivers, you saved my family, healed my heart, and taught me the real meaning of love. Would you do me the honor of becoming my wife?" Through tears of joy, Caroline accepted, as everyone applauded. But the biggest surprise of the night was yet to come. Mrs. Eleanor, visibly moved, stood up with the help of her cane, and for the first time in over a year, spoke a complete sentence without hesitation. "Now we are a real family." The wedding took place 3 months later, a simple ceremony in the mansion's garden. Caroline wore an elegant but unpretentious dress that reflected her authentic, unostentatious personality. Mrs. Eleanor, radiant in a turquoise suit, was led by Mrs. Jones' arm to her place of honor in the front row. Beatrice, after a plea bargain, was serving community service at a home for the elderly, under strict supervision. Dr. Morgan had lost her license and was facing an ethics investigation. But on that day, no thought was given to the painful past. It was a day of celebration, of new beginnings, of promises for the future. During the reception, while watching Richard chat animatedly with some guests, Caroline approached Mrs. Eleanor, who was resting in the shade of her favorite oak tree. "Are you all right? Do you need anything?" she asked, always attentive to her mother-in-law's well-being. Mrs. Eleanor smiled, taking Caroline's hands in hers. "I need only to see you happy," she replied with effort, but with eyes full of lucidity and love. "And we are, thanks to you," Caroline answered emotionally. "If it weren't for your courage—" Mrs. Eleanor shook her head. "No, thanks to you. You saved us." At that moment, Richard joined them, hugging them both affectionately. "The 2 most important women in my life," he declared, kissing his mother's forehead and then the lips of his now wife. A year after the wedding, the Ashworth mansion was once again the scene of a celebration, this time to welcome Peter, Richard, and Caroline's first child. Mrs. Eleanor, now able to walk with minimal assistance and communicate in simple sentences, was a doting and present grandmother. Her eyes, once empty and distant, now shone with joy as she held her small grandson in her arms. "He has your eyes," she commented to Caroline, who watched the scene with a heart overflowing with happiness. And his grandmother's determination, Richard added, joining them. Have you noticed how he persists until he gets what he wants? Just like you, Mother. The three of them laughed together, united by bonds that transcended blood and circumstance, bonds forged in the trials they had faced and the love they had built from them. That night, after Mrs. Eleanor had retired and the baby had finally fallen asleep, Richard and Caroline sat on the veranda gazing at the starry London sky. Sometimes I wonder how everything changed so completely, Richard reflected, holding his wife's hand. 2 years ago, I was about to marry someone I didn't truly love, blind to my own mother's suffering. Caroline rested her head on his shoulder. Life is full of unexpected turns. Who would have thought that a simple cleaner from a small town in Yorkshire would end up here, married to you, the mother of your child? You were never a simple cleaner, Caroline, he corrected gently. You were always an extraordinary woman just waiting for the chance to show your light to the world. She smiled, still occasionally surprised by the journey that had brought her here. Do you know what your mother said to me today while you were at the office? What? She said, sometime we must fall to learn to fly. Richard nodded, moved. She was always the wisest of us all. And as the night deepened over London, the Ashworth mansion remained lit, not just by electric lights but by the more powerful glow of love, redemption and hope that now inhabited every one of its rooms, every heart of its residents. Because in the end, as Caroline knew well, it is not titles, diplomas or fortunes that transform lives. It is the small gestures of courage, the quiet determination to do what is right, and the ability to love unconditionally, even when all seems lost. And that perhaps is the most valuable lesson of all. End of story. Dear listeners, we hope the story of Caroline, Richard and Mrs. Eleanor has deeply touched your hearts. To experience more emotions like these, we have a special playlist with other equally moving stories. Find it by clicking here on the side. If this narrative about courage, redemption, and the transformative power of true love touched your soul, don't forget to subscribe to the channel and leave a like. Every day, we bring new stories that explore the richness of human emotions and the beauty of new beginnings. Share in the comments which moment of this story moved you the most. We'll be back tomorrow with another story to warm your heart.